The royal guards of Buckingham Palace are known for their unshakable discipline, a force of history, tradition, and military precision. But one tourist, Ethan Carter, thought he could prove them wrong. Fueled by reckless arrogance and sheer stupidity, he made a dangerous choice. He tried to knock down a royal guard with his car. But what happened next? He never saw it coming. And by the time he was dragged from his vehicle in handcuffs, the internet would make sure he never forgot. The streets around Buckingham Palace were packed with tourists. Families posed for photos, guides waved little flags, and cameras flashed as people admired the iconic royal guards standing in perfect formation. But Ethan Carter wasn't impressed. Leaning against the hood of his rental car, he scoffed as he watched one of the guards stand motionless by the gate. "Man, these guys are such a joke," he muttered, arms crossed. His two friends, Ryan and Matt, exchanged uneasy glances. "Dude," Ryan said, shifting uncomfortably. "They're actual soldiers. You know that, right?" Ethan rolled his eyes. Yeah, but come on. They just stand there like robots. I bet if I nudged one with the car, he'd jump out of the way." Matt laughed nervously. "You're kidding, right?" Ethan grinned. "Only one way to find out." At first, Ryan and Matt assumed he was joking, but when Ethan slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, their laughter died instantly. "Bro, you're not actually gonna do it," Ryan said, stepping closer to the car. Ethan smirked, tapping the gas lightly, making the rental SUV purr forward just an inch. "Relax," he said. "I'm not gonna run him over. Just gonna give him a little scare." Matt backed up, pulling out his phone. "Dude, this is a bad idea," he said, but he was already recording. Ethan laughed, gripping the wheel tighter. His pulse pounded with excitement. This was going to be hilarious. He'd get a killer video, post it online, maybe even go viral. All he had to do was press the gas. So he did. The SUV lurched forward. Not fast, not reckless. Just enough. Enough for the crowd to gasp. Enough for people to turn their heads, eyes widening as they realized what was happening. Enough for someone to scream, "Oh my God, is he serious?" And just as the car crossed the invisible line, the royal guard moved. Thump! A boot slammed into position. The rifle shifted, fast, fluid, controlled, and then, "Stand back!" The command boomed through the air, shaking Ethan to his core. Every single hair on his arm stood on end. It wasn't just a warning, it was a direct order from a trained soldier. And it hit Ethan like a brick to the chest. His hands jerked on the wheel. His foot, still hovering over the gas, slammed down. And in that moment of pure, drunken panic, he completely lost control of the car. The SUV swerved wildly. The crowd screamed. Ethan yanked the wheel to correct the skid, but his panicked reflexes only made it worse. The car's tires screeched against the pavement. A woman yelled for her kids to get back. Matt's phone camera shook violently as he screamed, "Dude, what are you doing?" And then, crash. The SUV slammed full force into the metal barricades. A deafening impact, a sickening crunch of metal against steel. Ethan's world spun as his body lurched forward, his seatbelt snapping tight across his chest. The airbags exploded in his face, and for a moment, everything was silent. Ethan's ears rang. His head throbbed. The airbag deflated, leaving behind the smell of burnt fabric and his own shame. Through his blurry vision, he saw the crowd, dozens of people, hundreds, all staring, recording, whispering. And then, he heard it, the sound that made his blood turn to ice. Boots, heavy, slow, controlled, walking toward his crashed car. And when he blinked through the airbag dust, he saw him, the royal guard, standing right at his driver's side window, expression unreadable, posture perfect, unshaken, unbroken, unbothered. Ethan could barely breathe, because in that moment, he knew. This was about to get so much worse. Ethan's head pounded as he tried to process what had just happened. The airbag deflated slowly, hissing as it released what little dignity he had left. His chest ached from the impact, his hands still clutching the steering wheel in a death grip. But none of that mattered, because standing just outside his driver's side window was the Royal Guard, motionless, expressionless, completely unshaken by the disaster Ethan had just created. The crowd, which had been laughing and murmuring minutes ago, was now dead silent. Nobody was even pretending to be subtle about recording anymore. Phones were everywhere, capturing every second of Ethan's complete and utter humiliation. Somewhere in the crowd, a tourist whispered, "Oh, he's so done." Another chuckled under their breath. "This is going to be on the news." And then, the boots started moving again. Not the guards. No. A new threat was coming. One that Ethan had completely forgotten about. The rhythmic stomp of polished black boots echoed through the air. More than one pair. More than two. Multiple officers. Ethan's stomach dropped. Because coming toward him, faces unreadable, radios crackling, hands near their belts, were the Metropolitan Police. And judging by the way they were walking straight for him, they had already made up their minds about what was happening. The closest officer, a grizzled, no-nonsense man with sharp eyes, stepped up to the driver's side door and yanked it open. Ethan flinched. The officer leaned in, his expression dead serious. "Out! Now!" Ethan's entire body locked up. This wasn't a prank anymore. This wasn't a funny tourist story. This was real. His friends, who had been laughing just minutes ago, were now dead silent in the background. Not helping, not defending him, just watching, still filming, still recording every single second of his downfall. The officer sighed, clearly not in the mood for hesitation. He reached in, grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him out of the car. Ethan's legs wobbled as he tried to steady himself. He opened his mouth, desperate for some kind of excuse, but before he could even stammer out a sentence, the officer spun him around and slammed him against the hood of the car. The reaction was immediate. A collective "Oh!" rippled through the crowd as Ethan's face smacked against the dented hood of his rental. Somebody whistled. Someone else shouted, "And he's out of here!" And the cameras? Still rolling, still capturing every second of Ethan's absolute destruction. Tyler, standing just a few feet away, let out a nervous laugh. Ethan? You good, bro?" Ethan was not good, not even remotely. As Ethan lay pressed against the hood, struggling to process how his life had collapsed so fast, he dared to glance up. And there, just a few feet away, still standing tall and completely unaffected, was the Royal Guard, as if nothing had happened, as if Ethan didn't even exist. Still standing, still staring straight ahead, still unshaken. And somehow, that was the worst part, because he had risked everything to get a reaction. And the guard had given him nothing, not a smirk, not a glance, not even the satisfaction of being acknowledged. And that was the ultimate defeat. The officer, still holding Ethan down, clicked his radio. "We've got a reckless driving incident outside Buckingham Palace. One detained." Ethan felt his heart stop. Wait, it was an accident. I wasn't actually trying to—" The officer's grip tightened. "You drove a vehicle toward an active-duty military officer. That's not an accident, mate." Ethan wanted to disappear. Because now it didn't matter what he said. The crowd had seen it, the police had seen it, the Royal Guard had seen it, and worst of all, the internet had seen it, and they weren't going to let him forget. Ethan felt the cold metal of the car hood against his cheek, his brain still struggling to catch up to the absolute disaster that had just unfolded. 1 second, he had been laughing, confident, reckless, convinced he was invincible. The next, his rental car was wrecked, his face was pinned to the hood, and a British police officer was gripping his wrists like he was the world's dumbest criminal. And worst of all, the Royal Guard still hadn't reacted. Not even a flinch. Not even a side glance. Ethan had thrown everything at this guy, literally aimed a moving vehicle in his direction, and had been met with absolute indifference. And somehow that hurt more than anything else. The ringing in his ears from the impact of the crash started to fade, which meant Ethan could now fully hear the crowd. And it was brutal. Holy crap! Did he just try to run down a Royal Guard? The phones were still recording, every angle, every second. This wasn't just a bad moment. This was history being made. And Ethan was the main character, the worst kind of main character. Pinned against the car, Ethan dared to glance up. And there he was. The Royal Guard, the immovable force that had single-handedly, without even trying, ruined Ethan's entire life. He was right there, standing tall, standing motionless, standing as if Ethan had never existed. That was the worst part. Ethan had just crashed a car near him. Ethan had just been tackled by police. Ethan had just become an international embarrassment. And the guard did not care. His rifle was back in its perfect position. His stare was locked straight ahead, like none of this had even been worth acknowledging. And that was the moment Ethan realized he hadn't just lost. He had been completely erased. The officer pressing him against the hood sighed, clearly tired of his existence. "All right, genius," he muttered. "Let's get you out of the road before you embarrass yourself even more." Ethan barely had time to protest before he was yanked upright, hands still pinned behind his back. He wobbled. His legs felt weak. His brain was screaming, trying to find some way out of this. Listen, man," he started. But the officer was already shaking his head. "Save it. We're going to have a little chat down at the station." Ethan's stomach dropped. As the officer began dragging him toward the police vehicle, the crowd let him have it. "Bye!" someone called. A group of teenagers started chanting, "UK, UK, UK," like this was some kind of international competition, and Ethan had just lost on behalf of America. Some guy with a thick Cockney accent shouted, "Best part of my trip. Thanks for the entertainment, mate." And then, as if the humiliation couldn't get any worse, a kid, maybe 7 years old, holding his mom's hand, tilted his head and asked, "Mummy, why is that man so stupid?" The crowd lost it. The officer actually stifled a chuckle. Ethan wanted to be launched into the sun. As the police shoved him into the back seat, Ethan looked out through the window at the Royal Guard, still standing, still unshaken, still legendary. And that's when it hit him. He had done everything to try and get a reaction. And instead, the guard had let him destroy himself. Ethan had made himself the fool. And now, it was only a matter of time before the whole world knew it. Because somewhere right now, the internet was already uploading. Ethan sat crammed in the back of the police car, his hands still pinned behind his back, his forehead pressed against the window. He could see the crowd through the glass, still gathered, still laughing, still watching his downfall unfold in real time. He could see his wrecked rental car, the front bumper crushed against the barricades, the hood dented like a cheap soda can. And worst of all, he could still see the Royal Guard, standing there, as if none of this had ever happened. No reaction, no anger, not even a glance. Ethan had tried to humiliate him, and instead, he had only humiliated himself. And now, the rest of the world was about to find out. The drive to the police station was supposed to be the worst part of the night. It wasn't. Because before Ethan even arrived, his phone, still in his pocket, buzzing endlessly, was already blowing up. He didn't have to look at it to know. The video was out there, and it was spreading, fast. Before he even got to a holding cell, his entire life was already in flames. Tyler and Matt, his so-called friends, had wasted zero time. By the time he was booked, the video was already posted on TikTok, Twitter, X, Instagram, Facebook, you name it. And the views? Exploding. Comments were already pouring in, tearing him apart before he even had a chance to process his own stupidity. The memes? Brutal. One was a freeze frame of Ethan's panicked face before the crash with the caption, "The exact moment he knew he fed up." Another had slow-motion replay edits, dramatic music, and the words, "When stupidity meets discipline." And then came the worst one. Someone had taken the footage of the Royal Guard standing tall while Ethan's car crumpled into the barricades, and edited in the Dark Souls "You died" screen. It didn't stop at social media. Within hours, major news outlets were reporting on it. Tourist crashes. Car into Buckingham Palace, barricades after trying to intimidate a royal guard. BBC News. And then, the final blow. Ethan's family found out. Sitting in the holding cell, Ethan heard a guard call his name. "You've got one phone call." With shaky hands, he grabbed the receiver and dialed. It rang. Once, twice, then click. "Ethan Carter, what the hell did you do?" It was his mom. And from the tone of her voice, Ethan realized something horrifying. She didn't find out from him. She found out from Facebook, from the video, from her friends texting her. Ethan closed his eyes. This was so much worse than getting arrested. Because now his entire family knew. His mom, his dad, his grandma. And if there was one thing worse than being a viral idiot, it was having to explain it to your family. As Ethan sat there, listening to his mom lose her mind on the phone, somewhere outside, the Royal Guard was still standing at his post, completely indifferent, completely unfazed, because at the end of the day, Ethan wasn't even worth remembering. But the internet would never forget. Ethan sat on the hard bench of the holding cell, his back against the cold wall, his head buried in his hands. His life was officially ruined. His mom's voice was still ringing in his ears from their disastrous phone call. His friends had sold him out to the internet, and now the entire world was tearing him apart. And the worst part? He had no one to blame but himself. By the time Ethan was released, the damage was already done. The internet had taken his worst moment and turned it into a global phenomenon. The second he stepped outside the police station, his phone was buzzing non-stop, and when he opened it, he wished he hadn't, because now the video had gone nuclear. The original TikTok, 10 million views. The reposts on Twitter, X, even worse, and the comments, pure digital savagery. This man tried to fight a British soldier with a Ford Focus and lost. And then, the meme edits. Someone had clipped the exact moment the guard stepped forward, rifle shifting slightly, and added the words, "Stand back." The audio was remixed into songs. The clip was slowed down, turned into dramatic trailers, even edited into fight scenes from action movies. And then came the worst one. Someone had photoshopped Ethan's rental car crashing into the Titanic. Caption, "History repeats itself." Ethan wanted to scream, and just when Ethan thought it couldn't get worse, it did. Because now, the actual news was covering it. BBC, CNN, Lad Bible, the Daily Mail, all with brutal headlines like, "Tourist tries to run down Buckingham Palace guard, learns the hard way." Even late-night talk shows got in on it. Trevor Noah, laughing at the clip on air, said, "This man really thought he was gonna take out a King's Guard in a rental. Bro, you can't even parallel park in those things." The audience roared with laughter. And Ethan? Ethan wanted to crawl into a hole and never come out. By the time Ethan finally checked out of his hotel, trying to salvage what was left of his dignity, he passed a gift shop. Inside, sitting proudly among the souvenirs, a bobblehead of a royal guard, motionless, unshaken, unbothered. And for the first time in his life, Ethan understood true defeat. Because while he would never live this down, the Royal Guard, the legendary unshakable Royal Guard, had already forgotten him, but the internet never would. And that was worse than any punishment the law could ever give.